Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. In May last year, I spoke to Mark Davies, a partner at PA Consulting, about some research he just published on the evolution of the customer. Mark recently joined Hunch, a strategic innovation consulting practice based in London. Hunch has been around now for about 5 years, and it's entirely focused on innovation. So I called Mark to ask how companies can use innovation to improve the customer journey. Mark is joined on the podcast by the founder and managing partner of Hunch, Clarke. You founded Hunch as a strategic innovation firm, so why focus on that specific area? Why strategic innovation?
Well, I think there have been really 2 or perhaps now 3 generations in innovation. I mean, I got into it because I'm excited about inventing the future. I've got a belief that the future is more exciting than the past, and perhaps want to get there quicker. But when I started doing innovation consulting, working with big businesses, the idea of doing innovation in those environments was not massively popular. I spent really the first decade of my career going into large businesses and making the case for why they needed to innovate. And primarily it was a response to a digital driver. It was a response to the first wave of internet businesses. We then saw another decade, I suppose, the second epoch, in which innovation became really democratized. It turned up everywhere. Most of my clients, most of the FTSE 100s or Fortune 500s we work with, will have an innovation team and a lab. They've drunk the Kool-Aid on customer-centered design or design thinking. They've all been trained in agile delivery. They've all got the Macs and the ironic beards. But for all the apps and hacks and labs, nothing really important was changing. Everything that I saw coming out was incredibly incremental and incredibly obvious. And for a while, that was cool. I spent 5 years in an agency doing that kind of incremental work, and it was good fun. And it solved problems, and it helped organizations that didn't have a level of intimacy with their customers to think about and design for and with customers, which is helpful. It's really good, but to my mind, it's not much more than better BAU, and certainly that customer-centered design mindset addresses service failures in the near term, but it doesn't reinvent categories, and it doesn't unlock a different future. And I came to realize that's what really excites me. I think it's incumbent on big businesses to invest a bit of time to understand where the big and emergent opportunities and challenges of the next 5, 7, 10 years are, and then to work out how they make those interesting for their customers. I think it's responsibility of big businesses to direct and to pioneer us to that stuff. So that's the strategic angle. But innovation, because I never settle, I suppose. I'm excited about what's next.
I think from my perspective, the thing that attracted me to come over from a bigger firm to Hunch, from more of a sort of strategy background, was that I saw innovation talked about an awful lot, and I guess the light bulb went on in realizing that more and more of what I saw was just sort of polishing customer experiences or user experiences in a very tactical BAU way, and it wasn't genuinely innovative. So the idea of bringing strategy disciplines and innovation together was really attractive, and it resonated, I think, with a lot of the sort of large firm client base that I was perhaps more used to and talking to. So I think that's a sort of key differentiator for me in moving into a smaller firm environment.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose you're saying that although innovation itself is established, there is a discipline. We've all read Clay Christensen, etc. But the reality in most companies is that it's actually broken. So why aren't companies fixing this?
I think we work mostly with big services businesses, often in regulated services, so across financial services, energy, telecoms. But we only work with big businesses, and it's exciting because they've got a whole load of attributes which mean that they're well placed to build the future. And when I was growing up, I thought big businesses were going to build the future. It's now, I think, clearer than ever that they are stuck in very near-term trading, 6 months, 9 months. That's really as far as the planning horizon goes in lots of the biggest businesses. And it's driven by a number of factors. One is about incentives. CEO tenure in the UK has halved in a decade. It's now about 4.5, I think 4.8 years. So you're not incentivized as the CEO to build for the long term. As it happens, innovation director or chief innovation officer tenure is close to 22 months, which is kind of shocking. So there's one thing about incentives. There's another thing about risk aversion. If you've had to commit most of your budget to regulatory compliance or catching up with your competitors, you've got only a small amount of available funding for discretionary projects. And there is a disinclination to use that on higher risk pieces of work. So people do the safe bets stuff. More than ever, I think if you read the new book, The Infinite Game from Simon Sinek, he talks about the fact that CEOs really are no longer chief visionary officers. Big businesses tend to promote internally from people who've run operational business lines or who've delivered big internal programs. And you see it at Apple, you see it at Microsoft as great examples. Businesses started and scaled by visionaries and now managed by managers. And I think all of that sets a culture or a leadership philosophy which says we're here to run the machine. We're here to run the machine, and disruption is our enemy. And that comes top down. I think it's a real shame because big businesses are uniquely placed and I think have a moral obligation to build the future for all of us.
I think there's become something of a emperor's new clothes as well here, where people aren't really, leadership isn't honest about innovation. There's some great work that I saw from IMD, the Swiss Business School, recently, where this was around the idea of customer-led businesses. The difference between what management says and what they actually do is stark. So people will readily respond to surveys about being customer-led and say, yes, of course we do. Of course, that's what we aspire to. If you then look at what they actually do as exec teams, they typically pursue the safe space. They pursue the process improvement. They pursue cost out and operational excellence. And I think we're seeing a degree of that in the innovation world as well. And we've just completed some primary research asking leadership about how innovative their organisations are, what kind of innovation. And they all tell a very positive, ambitious story. But when you look at the reality, there's a chasm between what they say and what they do, and the tests of this are there for us to see. And pick a sector. You think about financial services and fintechs and all the talk that has been over the last 5 years or more, and yet the fundamental issues of the retail financial services market, where a lot of people struggle to be able to secure a mortgage. Or trust is continuing to be terribly low, certainly in UK retail financial services. There's all the talk at the minute about access to cash, impacting certain sections of society because of ATMs being withdrawn. Where's the innovation that's producing solutions and answers to these kind of fundamental market needs? So there is this chasm, I think, between what real customers want and need from innovation and what businesses are doing.
I think the other thing is that it's easier and more straightforward than ever now to drink the Kool-Aid on innovation. I think innovation theatre is quite a nice way for people to progress their career, and be seen to be a leader without really delivering very much. Many of the big organizations that we spend time with have a big disconnect between the core business, which makes all the money, and the lab and innovation teams, which broadly are a nice landing place for startups, but they don't have a direct input into a next generation P&L. And one of the problems is that development methodologies there's a real helpful thing around Agile, right? It's a really helpful way to drive speed into a delivery process. And in organizations that spend years failing to deliver big programs, MVP is a really helpful mindset. But what we see time and again is that sprints kill discovery. And if you're sprinting towards something, you're not exploring the paths less traveled. That's why all of the services that are launched incrementally all look the same, because they've asked the same questions of the same customers and come up with the same answers. We see MVP being constrained really by whatever organizations can lash together without investing very much or making too much effort. They push something out which really isn't true to the original insight or intent, but people get incentivized on launching the first iteration, and they never come back for the difficult second album. So MVP drives the release of really suboptimal stuff, and people move on. It's not sustainable, but in corporate culture, nobody's calling bluff on this fake news around innovation. Innovation theatre is enough in lots of these environments, unfortunately.
And isn't the problem then that you see people that set up a innovation lab rather than actually changing the culture of the organization?
Yeah, I guess, I'm sympathetic to the idea that big businesses have they're a big machine, right? And I see big businesses, fundamentally, the way they work, they are there to optimize BAU. They're not great places to deliberately disrupt. And actually, our research makes it very clear that when you talk to big businesses around disruption, that's perceived as being problematic, and it's got real negative connotations, despite the fact that I think Christensen taught us all about the opportunity and the need to actively disrupt. That's one of the reasons we talk about pioneer rather than disrupting, because it's around a business philosophy rather than being a victim of circumstance and context. So there is a business culture question, but frankly, for the organizations we work with, they need to keep the lights on and keep trading well with their current proposition set to current customers for the foreseeable future. I think our big agenda with them is to say, let's not be so myopic. Let's not be constrained by a 6 or 9 month planning horizon. Let's lift our head up a little bit and just get a sense of the changing landscape ahead, get a sense of the emergent opportunities and threats, so that we're actively chasing them or actively defending them, probably both, rather than just trying to defend against disruption. Let's see the opportunity to pioneer as a really positive leadership framework, rather than put up the barricades because there are enemies at the gate.
Yeah, and you've mentioned pioneer a couple of times. So, is that a particular concept then?
Yeah, I think the practice fundamentally, we exist to give senior leaders, so P&L owners or C-suite clients in big businesses, the confidence to pioneer. And we hark back to the days when big businesses were bold and brave, but those days are gone. The days of Jack Welch type leadership, that's in the past. Pioneering, to our mind, is a leadership philosophy which recognizes that there is an obligation on big businesses to use the assets and the capabilities they have. They have incredible customer franchise. They have big and deep resources. They've got great brands. They've got reach. They have the ability to lobby and shape the political and legislative environment. All of these are the tools that smaller organizations would love to have. And you have this strange situation where startups often think about a 5 and 20 year view, 5 years to create a category, 80/20 to dominate and scale, where you have family-owned businesses that think intergenerationally and are prepared to set down margin and profit for perhaps a decade to take their business somewhere new so that it's still there for the next generation. And yet big businesses, the businesses that have built modern commerce, these are the businesses that are frightened of thinking beyond 6, 9, 12 months, that are just stuck in this trading. And so our pioneer philosophy really is all about looking beyond the obvious and recognizing that there's an incumbent obligation on leadership of big businesses to shape and build the businesses of the future. I think more than that, actually, our experience is that the biggest businesses, the kind of organizations we work with, they bring momentum to market opportunity. They bring credibility to a space. And by playing into a space, they make it credible. They take an ecosystem in there. And that's how they can pioneer. It's not, to be really clear, it's not about being bolder or braver. It's not about taking bigger risks. This is about a leadership intent to create the businesses of the future.
And I think just to build on that, to be really clear what it's not about heroes.
Yeah.
There's a real risk that when you see people talking about this kind of thing, it actually becomes a very personified thing, and it's all about Musk, the man, as opposed, Mark, to your question earlier, the cultural context of, have they built an organisational vision, a capability, an intent to go and seek out uncertainty, and explore, adjacent space, create categories. That's what's defining of pioneers, not that it's the personification in an individual that business communities can worship. It's not about that, because that tends not to produce sustainable, profitable growth for an organisation.
You're right. This definitely isn't. This isn't solely about process. Culture is at the heart of it, and it's a leadership intent, really. The biggest and most interesting things that we've ever launched have come from often the most senior leaders making clear to their organisation that they were going to get this stuff into market. They were going to make it real. And things changed, because rather than every stage gate becoming an opportunity for a collegiate discussion that knocks off all of the interesting edges, every stage gate became a platform to say, how do we get there better? We're launching it. How do we get there better? And it's a change in mindset, because it's a philosophical change. There is it comes top down. You need leaders at the highest levels to be hungry for the future and to see part of their legacy as more than hitting the near-term numbers. That's why in our foresight work, you can't just bring the future to life by looking at where the incremental margin is going to be, where the new customers are, where the competitive spaces are. You really have to take senior leaders to a place where they've tasted the future, because it's that emotional resonance that builds a sense of legacy. And that's what we're all about, really. It's about giving people the confidence to go and chase that. It's a hunger, it's an intent.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're used to the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos, the Jack Welch, this personification of the like the hero CEO. But how do you then create a company that can become a pioneer?
Yeah, well, it's a challenge. I think in my career there are a few organisations that I've gone into to work in and been shocked at how it is part of their corporate culture. I think actually Barclays has impressed me most. There are always challenges in every business, but Barclays makes me think of Sony. They don't really like playing nicely with everyone else in their industry to define standards, but they do intend to get to the market first and to show off a little bit and to push the boundaries. And it's part of their brand, actually. It's certainly part of their internal kind of employer brand, I would suggest. And so it's baked into who they are. It's come from successive CEOs and their leadership model, but it's enduring in that business, for sure. I we've got a playbook around pioneers which talk about 7 different attributes, I suppose, of leaders. And the first thing is to know yourself as an organization and to understand your North Star. We go into a lot of businesses who have no sense of what they're for. They don't really understand, beyond reading a deck from a branding agency, they don't understand what's special about them and what they're trying to achieve, what their purpose is. So I think knowing yourself matters. Playing a long game matters, and signposting that to your team, saying that this is more than near-term results. I think an ability to look around corners helps. So not settling for the obvious sort of 2+2 stuff, not building around a linear future, but building unexpected businesses helps. You have to backcast to greatness. You need to get yourself out to the future and taste it and understand it, and then kind of constrain it to something customers are ready for. But more than anything, I think an enduring vision, which doesn't rely on customers to have all the answers. An enduring vision for your business, built around an understanding of the future, and crucially, a belief set, a purpose about the intent and the role of your business. That, to my mind, is the top table thing that sets the difference. If you set that out from the top and cascade it down, that we're here for intergenerational growth, that we have a purpose which is bigger than our products and bigger than our P&L, and we have a map to at least some of the hotspots of tomorrow, then people will get on board. People love working in purpose-led growth businesses, and people are infuriated to find themselves trapped in trading on yesterday's promises.
So, I mean, who can we look to as a good example? I mean, who do you admire then?
We've talked about Elon Musk, and I use him a lot because I love the fact that in the time it's taken the payments industry to not really compete with PayPal, he's reinvented solar and automotive and space exploration. And I think we're not about the cult of personality, but there is a force of will and intent which I admire. The less corporately, I'm a big fan actually of a guy called Clarence Birdseye, who invented a whole category of fast frozen food, which fed me and my friends growing up and changed the way that families get fed around the world. And all because one guy made it happen and built a business, which I think he then sold to Goldman's. But I think putting this in place in big business is still a relatively new, I think we're in this new epoch. I think in most big businesses, innovation is hype and theatre, and it is saccharine sweet. And the practice and the discipline of pioneering being a leadership philosophy, I think we're in some of the early days of it.
And then you mentioned Bezos, for all the stick he gets, and Amazon, I guess, as a firm gets, there's still it's not too difficult to admire the long game. So we've talked about this intergenerational thing, and I think clearly what Bezos has managed to instill, and it has become North Star, and famously encapsulated in their Earth's most customer-centric business, is we're here to develop value for this organisation over the long term. And it's hard not to be inspired by people doing something that's less certain, is less travelled, as we've said, and which isn't looking for a return this quarter, this month, this year.
I think that's a really good. It's perhaps an obvious example, but for unobvious reasons. The fact that that organisation identifies emergent categories and doubles down to fund them and scale them ruthlessly so that they own those domains. The world runs on AWS. The world sells on Amazon Marketplace. These are all very obvious, by the way. The future is very obvious if you bother to look for it.
It's a long shadow.
It's a long shadow. If you have the discipline to go out and understand it, these opportunities are there. You just need to find a way to develop sense-making sensitivity, to do the signal kind of mapping to know where these future opportunities are going to emerge. But yeah, Amazon's great at building new categories boldly. They're not constrained by who they were. They're not constrained by investor sentiment and trading. And that's why this is a leadership philosophy challenge and a cultural challenge, not a process challenge. It comes down to a hunger and an intent. And Amazon's intent is clear. We might not like it, but there's a very ruthless top-down intent in that business. And that's why we see them building the businesses of the future.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm at Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.